What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Health is Hard podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Matt Eichler, and I'm here to help you cut through the noise and find the strategies that actually work for building a stronger, healthier, more resilient you. As a seasoned chiropractor, fitness junkie, and founder of Element X Health and Fitness, I've seen firsthand how confusing and overwhelming the health and fitness landscape can be. That's why I've made it my mission to simplify complex concepts, bust myths, and provide you with actionable tips you can start using today. Each week, we'll dive into topics like optimizing movement, building muscle, bouncing back from injuries, managing pain, managing your mindset, and so much more. Whether you're looking to level up your nutrition game, fine-tune your fitness routine, or just feel better in your own skin, Health is Hard is here for it. I'll do my best to make even the most challenging topics engaging and relatable. I'm hoping you'll be learning, laughing, and leveling up your health every episode. All right, let's dive in. Let the brain gains begin. Remember, the information/opinions provided in these podcasts/videos is/are for entertainment and educational purposes only, and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
All right, Health is Hard, episode 8. We're diving further and further into the world of nutrition, baby. All right. So this is kind of an addendum to the last podcast, and there might be a couple more after this because this is just such a topic that I want to just kind of comprehensively cover first, just to have a resource for patients, clients, followers, anybody that's really trying to just get ahead in the world of nutrition. And like I said in the previous podcast, after you get through this little, let's call it a little mini masterclass, you're going to know more about nutrition and how to manage your own nutrition than most physicians do. I say that confidently because I've been in the space for 10 years or so, not specifically in the nutrition expertise world. However, I manage patients and I hear patients' experiences as far as the recommendations they get, you name it. Okay. I've heard so many different stories, and sometimes I just hang my head because I'm just man, there's so many competing opinions for whatever somebody thinks is the best approach when it comes to food, and understanding how to best manage the priorities that you need to be thinking about with nutrition, but also just how to help yourself get in better shape and then therefore benefit your long-term health and longevity and everything. Tonight might be a little boring, might be a little review for some of my more advanced followers and whatnot, but it's important to kind of lay the groundwork with all these fundamental nutritional concepts, because if you don't understand these, you're going to get lost in the sauce when it comes to understanding how to manage your health and your weight and your body composition and all those things. So super excited to dive into this one. I've got quite an outline laid out, so I might be referring quite a bit to my computer again, but there's just so much information here that I'm trying to get across, and I'm going to try to keep this one a little shorter, but that's because I'm breaking this whole thing up into 4 or 5 different podcasts. Okay. When it comes to nutrition in the modern world, I think one of the main priorities you need to be focusing on is your body composition. I really think the body composition situation is the overall umbrella under which a lot of your other nutritional priorities should kind of follow. And it doesn't really matter how you get to a decent body composition, but it also is important to do it in somewhat of a sustainable way, because sustainability is the key. And we're going to keep hitting that concept over and over again throughout this podcast. So one of the main things that I think is such a huge detriment to our health, and I hate the fact that this is such a sensitive topic these days, but it's simply body fat accumulation. If you have a tremendous amount of body fat on your body, your health just dwindles. It just does. There's no way we can get around that. There's no way we can be too sensitive and accepting of that, because it just simply is a problem. And with obesity rates going crazy in this country, approaching 50% of the adult population by, I think they estimate by 2030, that's going to be a major issue when it comes to taking care of every single different health condition possible, because obesity and just tremendous amounts of excess body fat just destroy your health. So what is body composition? Let's look at what body composition actually is. And body composition is basically just the term we use to describe the breakdown of different tissues in our bodies and how much of what we have. So we have fat mass, and then we have lean mass. Fat mass is obviously your adipose tissue or your fat pretty obvious. And then lean mass can be made up of a lot of other things. So there's things like water. Water is not considered fat. It's a lean mass. Your bone density is included. Your organ tissues are included, and your muscle mass is included. And depending on those ratios, you can have a tremendous amount of different health situations. So there's metabolic effects like your basal metabolic rate that are affected, your insulin sensitivity, hormone production, energy efficiency, disease risk. All those things are affected by your body composition. Basically, we're just going to talk about fat mass versus lean mass, or just basically body fat versus non-body fat. So let's talk about some optimal ranges. For men, you pretty much have an essential level of fat of 3 to 5% body fat. Your body's just not going to function without anywhere between 3 and 5% body fat. That's why you'll see some of these bodybuilders, they get on stage and they might be 3, 4, 5% body fat. And that is totally unhealthy in that moment. Okay. It absolutely is. But that's the extreme of a certain sport. And to get there, you have to sacrifice a little bit of your health to get to specific situations for a certain amount of time. But those bodybuilders and whatnot are never that lean all year round. Just doesn't happen. Okay. Now they may only pop up to like 6, 7, 8%, but there's no way they're down 3 to 5% year round. Okay. It's just your body can't sustain that. You know, a lot of athletes usually hang out between 6 and 13% body fat, men specifically. Your healthy individual is probably somewhere between 10 and 20%. Anywhere above 20, 25%, you're going to start to see some health risks. You're going to start to see some health issues. Okay. With women, it's a little different. Women have a little bit more body fat. This is pretty obvious. Most people know this. It's just how we're built. It's how we're designed. Women have an essential fat level of about 8 to 12%. All right. That's why even women that get super lean on stage, or even are super lean for a certain sport, they're usually not below 8 to 12%. Most female athletes are anywhere between 14 and 20% body fat. Healthy range, but anywhere from like 20 to 30% for women is usually considered healthy. Okay. Anything above 30% or 31% specifically is usually going to be associated with some health risks and some specific issues related to body fat. Health implications obviously are numerous, and better composition benefits things like your metabolism, better hormone balance, reduced disease risk. We're going to get into some details here in a minute. Improved longevity, enhanced quality of life overall. Okay, just no getting around that. Poor body composition risks, or excess body fat specifically, lead to things like metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and those kind of things, cardiovascular disease, joint issues, hormone problems, and just reduced function overall. Okay, there's a lot of different things that are involved here, but your body composition just affects everything. It really does. It affects how you feel. It affects how long you live. It's not just about being skinny. It's about being healthy. And your body really is just a reflection of your daily habits, the things you're putting in your body, the habits that you execute day to day, and just how you take care of yourself. So we're going to get into all those nuances of calories in, calories out here in a minute. But when you think about how easily it is to get calories in versus the crazy amounts of effort you have to go through to go calories out, or to actually burn calories, let's just look at this real quick. A 150-pound person running at a 10-minute mile pace for 60 minutes will burn roughly 700 calories, while a 200-pound person running at the same pace will burn like 933 calories. So the heavier you are, the more mass you're moving, the more you're going to burn calories, sure. And the average person will burn a certain amount of calories, like between 80 and 140 per mile as they jog, type of thing. Okay. Now, look at this. Your average large McDonald's French fry is 510 calories. You can do the math as far as how long that would take you to burn that. A single Haagen-Dazs ice cream bar is 310 calories. And a single Snickers snack size little candy bar is 80 calories. Okay, so you heard what I said. To run off a single little snack size Snickers bar, you got to run about a mile. So how many people are running a mile a day? How many people are running a mile a week? It's not many. It's not many. When you consider how many people are sedentary completely in this culture, you can completely understand that the calorie out situation is not happening. The calorie in situation, it's hard to even get away from. So slaving away at a treadmill for hours and hours is not the way to minimize the damage that we tend to get in with our excess food situation in this country, specifically in America. The abundance of calories is all around us at all times. But throughout this podcast tonight, just keep in mind that body fat accumulation is seriously one of the worst things that can happen to your health. Now, I don't mean that to shame anybody that might be in a situation where they have a significant amount more body fat, but it's just meant to kind of snap us awake and say, hey, this is a serious thing. So I'm going to just read a little excerpt from a book that I'm writing. I've been writing this for a while, but I've been sidetracked by a handful of other projects. But my nutrition book that's going to be coming out is going to be called What the Fork, and it's going to be talking about putting common sense back in nutrition. I don't know what the subtitle exactly is going to be, but I'm going to read a little excerpt from kind of the introduction here. It's probably about halfway done, so I'm just going to read this part. So, I've been fascinated by the world of human health, nutrition, physiology, and natural health for roughly 2 decades. I read my first nutrition book, recommended by my college football player turned bodybuilder turned math teacher sometime in early high school, and I've been hooked ever since. It was hard to see the y equals mx plus b on the chalkboard around this dude's freakishly large biceps. So the ADHD kicked in and my mind wandered off into a world of getting super jacked for sports, chicks, and I just thought looking like a freaking action figure would be cool. Why not be the superhero of your own movie, you know? Since then, I've always been fascinated by the idea of optimizing human physiology and performance via food, supplements, and nutrition. That math teacher turned me on to a tasty banana cream protein shake to start chugging after my workouts, and the rest is history. I was a biohacker on a mission to get jacked, bully people on the football field, run like a gazelle, and look like Arnold Schwarzenegger while doing it. When my college football dreams ended early due to an injury, naturally, my first job was slinging protein and supplements as a sales associate at a local GNC. But as my knowledge expanded through graduate school and postgraduate studies, I couldn't avoid smacking straight into this massive divide between 2 major camps, which equally interested me. The first camp was the sports performance, injury rehabilitation, body composition, optimization world. This world was comprised of bodybuilders, athletes, fat loss / muscle gain gurus, scientists, and sports nutritionists. The second group was the world of health, longevity, clinical nutrition, and the let food be thy medicine crowd. This world was composed of naturopathic physicians, health gurus, biohackers, and holistic health practitioners and coaches. The divider wasn't rigid or hard like cement. It was soft and flexible, as there was a lot of overlap between the two. But the overall intent and focus can often seem like they split off into the distance and head in completely different directions. You'll see a lot of headbutting online, but I'm confident that most of the time, the end goals are similar. The bickering is just unproductive and confusing for the average person. And that's kind of been my conundrum or my dilemma for years now. I've been trying to merge these two worlds because they kind of have slightly different takes on what nutrition should look like. And one is kind of focused on a certain specific performance-based goal, but the other one seems to be more focused on health and longevity and how to minimize disease and reverse disease via food and nutrition. And like I said, they're not mutually exclusive because body composition and fat loss and optimizing those things is so important for health overall. But sometimes one camp misses the boat for what the other camp's focused on, and then vice versa. So it gets to be this thing where sometimes it's super confusing because you'll see, somebody you just finished his book and you think, holy cow, this guy was onto something. This is great. I love this. And all of a sudden you'll see a guru online bashing the heck out of him. And you're like, well, this guy's got like 10 New York Times bestsellers. How could he be wrong? Like maybe he's making some claims that aren't completely scientifically backed and whatnot. However, his intent is probably really pure, I imagine, right? But then you got this evidence-based guru online that's just trashing him, saying that, this little micro nuance of what he claimed about this is like complete garbage and he should be completely discredited. I'm like, whoa, wait a second. He means well. Let's back up a little bit, but there's got to be some value on both sides here. So I've been on a mission to bring them together, and that's what I'm trying to do with this book. So with this podcast tonight, we're basically just going to talk about what do we need to focus on, and I think that the best thing we can do first is look at the world of body composition and fat loss. I think that fat loss governs everything else. When you lose body fat and you maintain a decent body composition, a lot of the other stuff just kind of melts away. Now, I'm not saying it's not important, and I'm not saying that there's not a ton of value in being very detailed about certain things with your nutrition. But if your body fat is gone off the rails, doesn't matter what kind of diet you do, as long as you get that back down, you're going to see your health improve. So basically, that's led me to believe that that body composition and fat loss is kind of this umbrella that we need to arrange all our other nutritional priorities under. And if you don't believe me, let's look at some key facts as to what happens when we get body fat off or when we lose fat. Okay. The first thing is we improve our cardiovascular health. Fat loss leads to improved cholesterol levels, reduced blood sugar. There's plenty of different mechanisms at play there. It also enhances your insulin sensitivity and your hormone regulation. Lower body fat can decrease inflammation and improve all kinds of different biomarkers. It helps you with your glucose metabolism and all of that. And actually, every 1 kilogram of fat loss improves your insulin sensitivity by roughly 8%. But all kinds of hormone effects are involved too. You have better testosterone production when you have less body fat. You have better estrogen balance when you have less body fat. You have enhanced leptin sensitivity, which is a hormone. It's kind of your satiety hormone. We're going to talk about it probably in the next podcast. Cortisol response is more balanced and regular when you have less body fat. We'll talk a little bit more about that on the next podcast, I believe, too. But basically, just better hormone profiles. You're also going to see a decreased risk of overall chronic disease when you have less body fat. Fat tissue it's not inert. It's an endocrine organ, and it's really producing and helping disrupt a lot of these issues when there's a certain amount of excess. Okay. Another one is reduced joint pain. This one's kind of obvious, right? A little less weight on your body can be significantly important for reducing the pressure on those joints, but also it gets into the hormonal effects too. There's certain studies that are going around now that are really starting to understand not just the excess weight situation on our joints, but the hormonal mechanisms that affect our joints too, and the inflammation. It's a problem. So, when you have less body fat, you're going to have less joint pain. You're going to have a little bit more ease of movement through those joints. Those joints are going to function a little bit better. Mental health is a big one too. You have improved mental health when you have less body fat. This can happen from a number of different mechanisms. Better sleep quality is another one. You think about all the rejuvenative and regenerative benefits of good quality sleep. And when you have excess body fat, you simply don't sleep as well. You basically just have a better quality of life when you have less body fat. There's no way to get around it. It's all one of those big umbrella things that if you can just check that box or knock that domino down, you help a lot of other things. And I remember hearing Dr. Lane Norton explain this, and I was like, man, that's really fascinating that it doesn't really matter how you lose weight, but when you do, you'll see almost like your entire health marker profile blood labs improve. And I was like, wow. So that means it doesn't matter how you did it. You could eat a crazy, weird diet. You could eat nothing but peanuts for 20 days straight or something and lose a certain amount of body fat, and all of a sudden you'd be, I'm not suggesting that obviously, but you would see your health markers dramatically improve as your body fat came off. Again, not endorsing a peanut diet here. Okay. Hey, it's Dr. Matt. Are you looking to make some moves towards better health and fitness and do so in an effective, efficient, and sustainable way? I'm excited to introduce to you Element X Personal Transformations, my premium online fitness coaching program designed to help you crush whatever fitness goals you may have, whether it's slapping on some muscle, building some strength, actually losing that stubborn body fat that keeps coming and going and coming and going, recover from a nagging injury, or all the above. Now, what sets the EXPT program apart is its personalized approach. You'll start with a 3-call intro process with me, Dr. Matt, personally, each lasting 30 to 45 minutes. During these calls, we'll dive deep into your unique needs, preferences, goals, and whatever else you want to talk about to create a customized fitness situation that's perfect for you. No more guesswork. No more one-size-fits-all approaches. With EXPT, you'll receive expert guidance, support, and accountability every step of the way. I've done my best to create a program that puts a chiropractor, physical therapist, and personal trainer in your pocket, or at least on standby. We'll work together to optimize your nutrition, training, recovery, and mindset to help you achieve sustainable, life-changing results. So if you're ready to do all that, head to the link in the description, complete the quick 5-minute coaching application. Not everybody's a candidate, but this quick application gives me all the details to let you know up front if it's a match or not. But don't wait, spots are filling up, and I can only handle so many clients at a time because of the detailed, personalized approach. So I hope to chat with you soon. But the problem is that people will lose body fat and they just can't sustain it. It's so common to see people yo-yo diet, right? They lose a little bit, they gain a little bit. They lose a little bit, they gain a little bit. It becomes this exhausting process where they go through all these crazy, hard-charging, triumphant efforts to lose a bunch of weight, and then you see them put it right back on. And there's a lot of reasons for that too. So the key with fat loss and body composition optimization is sustainability. And Lane, specifically, Dr. Lane Norton, is very big on that. And I love the movement he's kind of created because his focus, I think, has been somewhat solely on the sustainability of weight loss, fat loss. And it's brilliant. So, but the problem with those crash diets is that not only do they often fail when you look at the long-term situation, they can really wreck your metabolism. They can really set you back even further when it comes to your long-term weight loss efforts and goals. So I'm going to read a quote from Lane's book right here. And he's talking about how diets fail. And he says, quite frankly, diets are absolute failures. Not because people can't lose weight. People are actually great at weight loss. 6 out of every 7 people who are overweight will lose a significant amount of weight in their lifetime. The problem is these same people cannot maintain that weight loss. The weight regain statistics are absolutely shocking and terrifying. Within 1 year of weight loss, nearly 80% of people will have relapsed to their pre-diet weight. Within 2 years, that number is 85%. And within 3 years, over 95% of people will have relapsed to their pre-diet weight. You read that right. Diets have less than a 5% success rate, which by any standard is terrible. If that wasn't bad enough, of those people who relapse to their previous weight, 1/3 to 2/3 of them will regain even more weight than they had before they started the diet. And that was Lane Norton, Dr. Lane Norton, PhD, from Fat Loss Forever is his book. That sounds encouraging, right? Not so much. So in this podcast, we're going to dive into all things nutrition. We're going to kind of talk about some definitions and some basics tonight. Like I said, might be a review for a lot of my patients, clients, and listeners and followers. But I just got to lay the groundwork here so we can leverage this understanding to minimize fat accumulation and maintain healthy body composition as our number one priority. And then we can understand how to optimize nutrition for longevity and health and anti-aging and all those other things. But fat loss has got to come first. But it's not about getting shredded. It's about getting healthy, and it's about sustaining a certain body fat percentage that's ideal for you, but works for you, but also you can stick with it, okay? And when it comes to this, knowledge is the key to this sustainability. If you just have a few habitual patterns and understand the world of nutrition just a little bit better, you're going to make a lot more solid choices when it comes to what you're putting in your body. All right. Knowledge is power in this situation for sure. And if you knew better, you'd do better. Well, sometimes that's not the case, but if we know better, we know what to fall back on. Okay. Sometimes we're going to go off the rails, and that's okay. And there's a reason that Dr. Lane Norton is such a big fan of flexible dieting, which we're going to talk about later, because that flexibility tends to facilitate adherence and sustainability. And I'm all for that. So we got to start with the basics. I've tried to create kind of a hierarchy of what we need to know, but we're just going to kind of dive into nutrition 101. And the first thing we got to talk about is something called energy balance, because energy balance really is the governing structure by which we do lose or gain weight. It doesn't really matter. It does come down to calories in versus calories out. Now, that's a very nuanced situation. People don't realize that it's not as easy as just burning the calories that you brought in. There's a whole lot of physiology involved here. We're going to start to create some understanding via some definitions and just some basic knowledge here, okay? So first thing we need to look at is energy and calories. What's a calorie? Calorie is sometimes abbreviated as a kcal in certain scientific publications and textbooks and whatnot. And the scientific definition is the energy needed to raise 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. The practical definition is basically the unit of measurement of food energy. This is how we basically measure how much energy is in a certain food. And energy balance here is consisting of a few different things. So we have input, so that's the calories in. That's whatever we're consuming. Food, drink, liquids, whatever we're consuming, those are typically calories in. Now, output is whatever we're burning, right? What is our body and our physiology burning? Not just how are we going to the gym and just running on the treadmill forever and that's the calorie. No, there's a lot of other things happening that's burning calories, but there's a lot of different nuances as to why those calories are being burned and the way they're being burned, how they're being burned, all those things, okay? But this is basically your metabolism. This is your activity and your metabolism that you're using just to kind of live life, but also including some of those things that are added to our lives via some of the habits that we acquire or that we take on. And then the balance between the two is obviously the relationship between the input and output. Now, the input is pretty simple. The output is very nuanced. But basically, when our input equals our output, we're going to maintain our weight. Kind of obvious, right? That weight remains stable. The body has sufficient energy for certain functions, but it doesn't have too little, doesn't have too much. When we have a surplus of calories, when we're in kind of an energy surplus, well, now we have a positive energy balance. And now our input is greater than our output. So now we have energy being stored, typically as fat, typically as body fat. But this is also required for muscle growth. If you're trying to put on muscle mass, if you're trying to build tissue, you typically need a little bit of a calorie surplus. And then we have a deficit, an energy deficit or a calorie deficit. Basically is a negative energy balance. That basically means your input is less than your output. So now you have energy drawn from the stores, and that's going to result in some form of weight loss. So those are just your basic laws of thermodynamics. It makes sense, right? But why does that matter so much? It matters because all body composition changes require those factors to be manipulated. And if you don't understand that, well, then you can sometimes just kind of shoot in the dark and not really have a great understanding as to what you're even trying to do. And this is why people yo-yo diet, because they crash diet, they think they're doing things right, they start eating better and things get better, but then they start going back to those old habits. They're not necessarily being a little bit more meticulous with what's going on, and then all of a sudden it comes right back. And like I said, the calories in is pretty simple, right? This doesn't require rocket science to understand that what you're bringing into your body has a certain amount of energy, and your body's going to assimilate that energy to a certain degree for a number of different factors. But the calories out part of the equation is much more nuanced. So here's a few different components of your calories out. And basically, your calories out equals what we call your total daily energy expenditure, or your TDEE. Lane does a great job breaking this all down in his book, and you can find it in a number of different textbooks and whatnot. This is standard kind of thermodynamics of metabolism and whatnot. But your TDEE is your total daily energy expenditure, and that's made up of a few different things. The main thing that makes up your TDEE is called your basal metabolic rate, or your BMR. Your BMR is basically your energy requirements, the calorie requirements that just allow you to keep the lights on. That just allow your basic physiological functions to keep you alive. This is not including, exercise or movement or any of the calories that you're really burning consciously or even unconsciously. This is completely unconscious, just your basic physiological functions. That makes up like 60-70% of your TDEE. So that's the biggest factor to try to manipulate in this whole situation. And we're going to talk about that later. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's a couple other things involved. There's also something called NEAT, NEAT, which stands for non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This basically are all the little movements that your body's doing throughout the day, fidgeting, moving, walking here and there, not intentionally exercising at all. But this is your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And then there's your exercise activity thermogenesis. This makes up an even smaller amount than your NEAT. Okay, so your movement throughout the day is big when it comes to your calorie burn. So you need to be moving throughout the day. Some people think they can go crush the gym and then go sit all day and they're going to be in a good spot. And sometimes they can be if they're really getting after it and they're doing things, perfectly optimal in a number of different ways. But really, if you're not moving throughout the day, you're missing a huge block of your energy output that's really required to help you maintain a better body composition. And then there's something called the thermic effect of food, the TEF, the thermic effect of food. And this is basically what your body has to do physiologically to digest food. And certain foods have different thermic effects. They require more energy to break them down. Protein specifically is the highest thermic effect of food. That's why it takes your body a lot more energy and time to break down protein. Therefore, it's much more satiating. Your body just can't really consume tons and tons of protein. Carbohydrates and fats, on the other hand, not quite so hard. So we tend to overconsume those things. But basically your BMR, your NEAT or your NEAT, your thermic effect of food, and your EAT are basically your exercise activity thermogenesis. Those make up your total daily energy expenditure. Now, there's a lot of nuances even within those, but I want you to understand that that's how complex the energy output portion of the equation is. So some people think they can just track their calories and they'll see, I should burn this much because I'm this person. There's a lot of equations and stuff online where you can look this up and figure out, I should, it says this online calculator says I should be burning this many calories. So I just need to eat this many or a little bit less and I should be fine. That's not how it goes. There's a lot of different nuances and there's a lot of metabolic adaptation, which is a big buzzword that we're going to talk about later too, because it's just going to be too much to get into tonight. that happens, and your body really, it outsmarts you. You know, you think you're going to outsmart your physiology. I always tell my patients this: you think you're going to outsmart your physiology? Good luck. You got to be really, really detailed and actively create some sort of effort to outsmart your physiology. You'll think that you're in a calorie deficit, and you may be, but that's where your hunger comes from. So now you're like, oh yeah, I'm fine. I hit all my calories this day, whatever day, week, whatever. But then you all of a sudden find yourself in the kitchen at 3 a.m. rummaging through, the pantry, and your body's trying to outsmart you. It's trying to stay at a certain amount or even in a surplus if possible. So it's really tricky, but we'll keep on moving here. So basically, the key principles I want you to remember from the energy balance section here is that energy cannot be created or destroyed. All right, that's a basic law of thermodynamics. It's going to go somewhere. Your body has to do something with it. So we need to be able to understand how to balance our input and output. Body weight changes only are reflected by energy balance. Okay, there's a lot of people out there that'll tell you that's not the case, but when the rubber hits the road, that's always going to govern the situation in one way, shape, or form. Okay, it is calories in versus calories out, but calories in versus calories out is very nuanced. Not all calories in are the same. Not all calories out are handled the same way with your physiology. It's a very nuanced discussion. It's not so simple, but your body composition relies on that equation. It really does. Individual responses will vary because of different situations. Every body is different. I can't tell you how many times I say this every day to patients in the clinic. Every body is different. I wish I could create some generalization for you that applies to Joe Schmo, that applies to Grandma Betty, that applies to, Nancy, the CrossFitter, that's a freak and does all kinds of crazy stuff and burns 1 million calories a day. It's just not the same. Now, our anatomy is pretty much the same. Doctors learn how to understand what the normal human anatomy is, but there's even a lot of variability in that. The anatomy map is the same, but a lot of people have little nuances that are different here and there, not specifically as far as like having extra bones or different organs or anything, but the way those things function and the way they move and the way they interact and the way that they're in their natural condition because of the health of the tissues, it's all different. So no two patients are the same when it comes to me working on people as a chiropractor. No two patients or clients are the same as far as a fat loss situation or as far as a health journey in any way. Everybody has unique challenges. Everybody has different genetics. Everybody has different habitual nature versus nurture situations that have brought them to the place that they're at right now. So if we're diving further and further into Nutrition 101, we're going to move on beyond calories in versus calories out and energy balance. And we're going to look at input. And input is composed of nutrients. So nutrients, both macronutrients and micronutrients. So we're going to kind of do a little deep dive on what macronutrients are first, and then we'll get into micronutrients. So macronutrients are basically your carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and even alcohol. First one we're going to look at is protein, because protein is the most important by far. Can't convince me otherwise. I've done way too much study in this world to understand that if you had to prioritize one macronutrient, you have to prioritize protein. So the word protein comes from the Greek proteos, meaning primary or first rank. And it's often called the building block of life. It's the only macronutrient that's completely essential. We can't survive without it. So why does protein matter? It's virtually required for every process in the body. You can't find much of a structure of yours that's not composed of protein in some way. It cannot be stored like fat and carbohydrates can. And it must be consumed regularly for just overall health. You have to get protein in. When you start to not consume protein, your body starts to attack its own protein, and then you start to waste away. And sometimes they call that like cachexia with like cancer victims and whatnot. When they're going through cancer treatments, sometimes they start to waste away. They almost start to metabolize themselves for energy, and it's not a good situation. And a lot of times that is actually what takes people's lives instead of the actual disease, but it was a byproduct of the disease because of the cachexia, which is the wasting away. It's just crucial for survival. You can't get around it. Some of the essential functions of protein are building and repairing tissues, creating enzymes and hormones, supporting immune function, maintaining fluid balance, transporting nutrients, and providing structure to the skin, the hair, the nails, and of course the musculature. Unique characteristics of protein: it contains nitrogen, which is a specific periodic table element that is not as much in carbs and fats. It's made up of amino acids. Okay, so amino acids are basically just the building blocks of protein. A lot of amino acids come together to form proteins. It's the most versatile of all macronutrients for a number of different reasons. And the body can break down and rebuild proteins as it needs, but it has to have the raw building blocks to do that. So it's important. There are 20 amino acids that basically form all human proteins. There are 9 essential amino acids, meaning we must get them from food. And then there's 11 non-essential amino acids, meaning our body can produce those ones. Each one of those has its own unique properties and functions. And those matter because of the different ways they're utilized by our body. Let's take a look at the essential amino acids. The essential amino acids, which means we must obtain them from our diet, are leucine, isoleucine, valine. Those are the branched chain amino acids. We'll talk about that later. Lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan. Everybody's heard about tryptophan, Thanksgiving, turkey. Histidine. We have to get those from our diet. And then there's the non-essential amino acids. So your body can synthesize these, but some of them would be considered conditionally essential because it helps to have more of them in our body to help basically synthesize them. Those ones are like alanine, asparagine, aspartic acid, glutamic acid, serine, and then a handful of others, but glycine, cysteine, tyrosine, glutamine, arginine, those are all conditionally essential. So it's basically like our body can make those, but we really would do better if we had an abundance of them to help pull those raw materials from. And some of the key functions in the body of those specific amino acids are things like structural maintenance, muscle tissue maintenance and growth, connective tissue, collagen and elastin, hair, skin, nail formation, bony matrix protein structure formation. They're involved in a ton of different metabolic, enzyme, regulatory, immune system functions and physiological processes. But there's a few that I really want to specifically talk about here, just because they're that important. And if you start to understand what some of these amino acids can do for you, you'll better leverage them for sure. The first one is leucine. So leucine is one of the branched chain amino acids. There's leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And it's the main anabolic trigger. So when our body gets a certain amount of leucine, it activates this pathway called the mTOR pathway. And the mTOR pathway is kind of like your protein synthesis pathway, which meaning it's going to trigger the growth and the rebuilding of proteins and different structures in your body. The critical threshold that your body typically needs to hit is about 2.5 grams to 3 grams of leucine per meal to optimize muscle growth. So a lot of bodybuilders are really keen on this. They understand that leucine is really important and that leucine amino acid is something they're always trying to prioritize at each meal. It has other key roles too, like blood sugar regulation that helps with growth hormone production, wound healing even, exercise recovery specifically because of the muscle recovery and whatnot. So a few foods that have leucine in them are like whey protein is like the number one. So whey protein, typically there's like 3 grams per 30 gram serving of whey protein. Parmesan cheese actually has about 3.1 grams per 100 gram serving, but 100 grams of Parmesan cheese is a lot. Okay. Tuna specifically has about 1.7 grams per 100 grams. And then another one here, egg yolks and beef sirloin specifically have about 1.5 grams of leucine per 100 grams of food. Now, I think that's 1.5 grams of the macronutrient per 100 grams of the overall food weight. Now, that's another nuanced discussion that we got to get into because people goof this up all the time. Grams is also a weight measurement, but grams is also a macronutrient measurement. So can't get those confused because it's really easy to do. And I've had people measuring stuff where they're like, yeah, I got 100 grams of protein. I was like, nah. No, you didn't. Just because that food was all protein and it weighed 100 grams didn't mean you got 100 grams of protein. But I know that's confusing and we'll talk more about that, the details of that later. Anyways, let's talk a little bit about protein synthesis. And protein synthesis is basically the process that happens. It's activated by that mTOR pathway, and it's what builds proteins. The trigger events for protein synthesis are usually something like training damage. So when we train our muscles, lifting weights specifically creates these little micro tears in the muscles. Those muscles then have to repair, and they have to send out repair signals to get them repaired. The body then mobilizes resources. And then you got to kind of think of this like a construction site, right? After maybe even like an earthquake. Let's say you have a hard workout. It's like an earthquake for your body. You have to get the construction site in there to start cleaning stuff up, start reorganizing, and start rebuilding everything back better, maybe in a more sound or foundational perspective, or maybe even bigger. That's muscle growth. That's how that works. When you feed yourself protein, now you're providing the raw materials, the building materials. You're activating the building signals. You're starting the cellular machinery, and it's like delivering lumber and resources to the actual construction site. You also have hormonal signals. Testosterone is kind of like the foreman, right? He's organizing stuff. He's making sure everything's in place. Growth hormones, like a crew manager, okay? It's making sure everything's happening the way it needs to be happening. Insulin is like the delivery truck. It brings the nutrients. It brings the whatever you need, the raw materials. And they all must work together in unison and in a specific fashion to optimize repairing from like a hard workout or a hard lifting session, or even a really super active day where you just feel burnt out and a lot of your muscles were taxed because of the work that you did that day. You just set the groundwork for a construction site. Now, the way you rebuild it depends a lot on your nutrition, a ton on your nutrition, but also a handful of other physiological processes. That's a good way to look at protein synthesis. And we're just going to move on right into the next amino acid I want to focus on. And that one's glycine. Super important. I've learned a lot about glycine in the last few years. It's a major component of collagen. It's about 35% of what collagen is. So collagen is something that basically holds us together. It's like the connective tissue component of our bodies. Now, glycine is specifically a conditionally non-essential nutrient, meaning that our bodies can construct glycine and it can kind of pull glycine from areas, and it doesn't necessarily need to feed on glycine, but it's conditionally essential. If we have more of it coming in, we have a way more optimal situation when it comes to rebuilding a lot of those structures that require a lot of collagen and then therefore glycine. But it also has other functions as well. It has lots of other functions. It helps with sleep enhancement. It also is involved in detoxification. It helps form a specific compound called glutathione, which is kind of like your master detox molecule. And it plays a huge role in like joint health, skin integrity, blood sugar control, creatine synthesis even. And some of the things that glycine is in are like pork skin and rinds, about 11.9 grams per 100 grams of that. Bone broth is another one, 0.8 to 1.5 grams per cup of bone broth. You'll have that much glycine in there. Gelatin is another one, 19.1 grams per 100 grams. That's probably the best way to get it. And then chicken skin and tendons and those kind of things. That's where glycine specifically is, but also that's the main component we need to help rebuild collagen. And collagen is super important. Actually, Dr. James Danico Lantonio is how you pronounce his name, I believe. He's got a handful of great books on nutrition. They're a little heady. They're designed for practitioners or health coaches and whatnot. But he just wrote a book not long ago called The Collagen Cure. I have it. I've been skimming through it and reading through it a little bit just to prepare for this podcast, but also to put some stuff into my book. And it's great stuff. I mean, he wrote an entire book on just collagen. So it clearly has some significant importance. And remember, glycine is the primary amino acid in collagen. Next amino acid, glutamine. You've probably heard of glutamine. Some people have taken glutamine over the years for like enhancing anabolic activity and trying to maintain, certain bodybuilding levels and certain muscle tissue maintenance and whatnot. Glutamine is the most abundant amino acid in the body, hands down. It becomes kind of conditionally essential during like stress and illness and those kind of things. It's hard for your body to build glutamine, or it's hard to leverage and use its own glutamine. It's also the primary fuel for intestinal cells. And this is something I've learned a little bit more recently. And a lot of different like GI supplements and stuff are starting to use glutamine in them because it's actually a primary fuel for a lot of your intestinal cells. And it can really help with a number of different things. It helps maintain the gut barrier integrity. Leaky gut is a major issue for a lot of people, and we'll probably get into that a couple podcasts from now. It helps maintain your immune system function, helps your brain health via GABA synthesis, which is another neurotransmitter. It helps with exercise recovery because it helps support your muscle mass. And it also even helps with your acid-base balance and your kind of pH neutrality and whatnot. And that's a whole world that I don't even know much about when it comes to how our bodies perfectly maintain the certain pH. There's this whole alkalinity versus acidity camp out there in the health and wellness and nutrition space. And it's something I need to learn more about, but I know the basics, and I know a lot of gurus out there that kind of shit talk it because there's not really a whole ton of evidence, I guess, that supports, you really need to support your acidity versus alkalinity. Now, don't get me wrong. When you understand what alkaline foods are versus acidic foods are, you can understand that the alkaline foods probably have more health priorities and help maintain different health priorities better than the acidic foods. However, I think there's a huge component of the acidic foods that we really need too. Your body creates this acid-base balance with your own physiology. It's going to regulate things, and sure, certain foods might make it work harder and certain foods might not make it work as much. However, your body has to physiologically maintain a certain alkaline balance or else you'll die. So like our pH has to be within a certain subset, it's like 7.25 to 7.35 or something, or else you just don't function. So our kidneys, our lungs, there's so many different processes that are constantly managing that situation that really no matter what comes in, your body will have to figure it out or else you die. So, I'm still kind of on the fence as far as like how much of the alkalinity versus the acidity situation do you need to focus on. But don't get me wrong, I believe there's merit there and there's definitely some utility. So I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater at all. I think that there's probably some significant benefit to looking into that. However, for this podcast and for my knowledge base right now, wouldn't call myself an expert on acid-base balance of the pH of your blood and whatnot. Okay. Let's move on to the next amino acid. The next amino acid is methionine. Okay. Now I might be pronouncing that wrong. Maybe it's methionine. It's really important for a number of different things. And this is on a deep physiological level. It's essential for the methylation cycle in your cells. And there's something called the SAMe production pathway. And this amino acid is critical for it. Okay. It's a sulfur-containing amino acid specifically, and it's critical for certain detoxification pathways as well. But the DNA methylation role is probably the most important role. It's big with protein synthesis. It helps with detoxification, specifically heavy metal detoxification. It does help with cartilage formation as well, just like glycine did. It supports taurine and cysteine production. Those are two other amino acids that are really important for a number of different functions. And the highest amount of methionine that I could find was in Brazil nuts. Brazil nuts have about 1.1 grams per 100 grams of the food. Tuna has 0.7 grams per 100 grams. Beef liver has 0.8 grams per 100 grams. And then egg whites have a pretty high amount of it as well. I didn't get an actual measurement, but that one actually has a very high bioavailability component too. But as far as these four amino acids that we just covered, I think that those are really important ones to be looking out for and be consistently consuming. Animal proteins are generally higher in all four. Collagen-rich foods are highest in the glycine. Obviously, that makes sense because they're components of one another. Dairy is excellent for leucine. Dairy, like milk and whey, is obviously derived from milk, and that's the highest amount of leucine you'll find is in dairy products. Organ meats are good all-around sources for these amino acids as well, but there's some synergistic effects between these four as well. So when you see leucine and glutamine together, you're going to see enhanced recovery, muscle building, those kind of things. You're going to see a lot of physiological recovery from intense exercise and rebuilding of the structure that allows you to exercise. And then with glycine and methionine, I will get that eventually. I think it's methionine. I don't know. Doesn't matter. Methionine. You'll see it spelled Methionine. Okay. But those two, glycine and methionine, are really improving your detoxification pathways in a number of different ways. So all four are synergistic with each other, and you can see how a couple of them can team up to really handle a certain job. So all these different amino acids have different functions. Now, it's not important to get super nuanced because a lot of times you bite into a big piece of protein, let's say like a steak, you're going to get a ton of these amino acids, probably all of them. Okay. There's what's called complete proteins and non-complete proteins. So certain proteins, a lot of times these complete proteins are animal proteins. They tend to have all the amino acids you need. All right. Some of these plant proteins and whatnot, the non-complete proteins have not quite that much. They don't have all the amino acids that your body needs. So real quick, some dietary sources of just protein in general. Your animal sources like meat, you're going to get anywhere between 20 and 25 grams per 100 grams of food. Fish, you're going to get between 20 and 25 grams per 100 grams of food. Eggs, you're going to get 6 to 7 grams per large egg of protein. Dairy, you get 7 to 8 grams per cup of milk. Plant sources, these are generally incomplete. Cup. Legumes, 15 to 20 grams per cooked cup. Nuts, you're going to get 20 to 25 grams per 100 grams of nuts, which is a decent amount of nuts. So you're going to get a significant amount of fat with that as well with most nuts. So be careful with that. Seeds, you get 20 to 30 grams per 100 grams. Again, seeds, very low weight. They're 100 grams of seeds is a tremendous amount of seeds. There's a ton of other nutrients involved there as well. And then soy is a bit of a different one. You're going to get 15 to 20 grams per 100 grams of soy. And soy actually is a complete protein. It's one of the only plant-based complete proteins. So super good to understand that and know. The general population probably needs to be getting between 0.8 grams, maybe a gram per kilogram of body weight. But optimal is probably 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram a day for most adults. Strength athletes, though, and athletes in general, maybe 1.6 to 2 grams per kilogram per day, which I would say if you want to not deal with the kilogram situation, why don't you just go about a gram per pound of lean body mass. That's usually the best way to go. About a gram per pound of lean body mass. Let's say I weigh 200 pounds. Let's say I have 15% body fat. That means I have 30 pounds of body fat on me. So I have 170 pounds of non-body fat. So I need 170 grams of protein every day. That's ideal for just overall physiological function, supporting the muscle mass that I do have, supporting the other structural functions that I need that protein for, but also, not getting too much or too little. But even during like caloric restriction, like if you're on a diet, sometimes you need more. And it's ideal to have more protein when you're on somewhat of a calorie restriction diet or if you're in a calorie deficit situation. And that might be like up to like 2 to 2.4 grams per kilogram per day. So it varies, but those are some baselines to just kind of wrap your head around. And if you have to do the calculations, go ahead and do it.
All right, listen up, gym rats. Are you tired of supplements that overpromise and underdeliver? Yeah, I know. Many supplements don't even contain what they say they do these days. Fear not. Introducing Legion Athletics. Their no-nonsense approach to supplementation is based on real science and real results. Whether you're looking for a new protein powder, a better pre-workout without a bunch of junk in it, or you just got to re-up on your fish oil, your creatine, your joint support formula, Legion is my go-to supplement line due to their evidence-based approach and reliably effective products without a bunch of BS ingredients. Visit legionathletics.com and enter code DRE, Dr. E with no period, at the checkout for 20% off your first order and double loyalty points on subsequent orders. Legion Supplements, because you ain't got time for supplements that don't work.
All right, so let's go into some benefits of higher protein intakes. I guess this entire podcast could just be on protein. I really could. I probably should just stop this after we're done talking about protein and just move on. But I'm going to try to bang through the rest of this thing. So benefits of higher protein intake: body composition, obviously. Okay. It helps with enhanced muscle protein synthesis. So therefore, you're going to have better body composition because more muscle mass equals less body fat usually. Improved muscle retention during weight loss is another component. So if you have calorie restriction happening, if you're eating a higher amount of protein, your body's going to hold on to its muscle, which therefore allows it to hold on to a lot of its metabolism. I always say muscle equals metabolism. We'll talk about that more later too. And that's basically because there's a higher thermic effect of food, but also when you have more muscle mass, you typically raise your BMR, your basal metabolic rate. When it comes to the numbers, when it comes to the thermic effect of food, so your thermic effect, again, was the amount of calories your body burns just by consuming and digesting a certain nutrient. With protein, it's like 20 to 30% of the calories that are digested. You're going to burn those during the process. With carbs, it's only like 5 to 10%. And with fats, it's like 0 to 3% are actually burned during the process of digestion. So protein burns more calories. And why is that? It just requires a more complex breakdown. It increases muscle protein turnover. It demands more ATP, which is basically your body's energy system. It requires more of that to actually break it down, and it requires more heat to break it down, which is thermogenesis. So it requires more heat and energy and just effort for your body to break it down. And that's why sometimes people get what's called the meat sweats. If you eat a lot of protein, all of a sudden your body gets hot and you're like sweating for no reason. I'm guilty of this. This is definitely my thing. It's probably why I'm so hot when I'm running around the office, because I'm always eating a pretty high protein diet. But just remember, when you eat 100 calories of protein, your body typically only keeps 70 to 80% of those calories. Well, That's probably not the right way to measure this, but just remember, when you eat 100 calories of protein, you're going to net only about 70 or 80 calories gained, because you're going to input 20 to 30 calories into actually digesting that protein. It doesn't mean that you're actually only keeping a certain amount of that protein, and maybe you're keeping less or more. That's a very nuanced situation. Don't worry about that. Okay. But the key point here is just protein is expensive for your body. It's not easy for your body to digest and basically process, which is a good thing. Your body needs to have stress to it in certain ways to actually maintain certain physiological functions, especially when we have such an abundance of calories coming at us. It might be a good thing for your body to be working a little harder at digesting one nutrient versus, assimilating a ton of other super hyper palatable nutrients that could really make your health just go into a tailspin. Also has other effects like your metabolic health. It helps improve insulin sensitivity. It helps glycemic control. We'll talk about that in a minute. It helps with bone mineral density. It helps with inflammation. And it also, again, satiety and weight management. It's not as easy to consume. So therefore you have this greater feeling of fullness. You have reduced hunger hormones. You have a lower calorie intake overall, typically when you're eating somewhat of a higher protein diet. And it's just easier to adhere to certain diets when protein is kind of the pinnacle or the main priority. All right, so we're going to move on to carbohydrates. All right, carbs. So they're kind of an essential energy source. Carbs have 4 calories per gram. I think I forgot to mention that protein has 4 calories per gram as well. Can't believe I forgot to mention that. But that's one of the most important aspects of the macronutrient. Okay, so carbohydrates are the next macronutrient on the docket here. And you have different carbohydrate classifications. So you have simple carbohydrates, and then you have complex carbohydrates. Now, simple carbohydrates are monosaccharides and disaccharides. This isn't really important. This is kind of biochemistry, organic chemistry, and that kind of thing. But monosaccharides are single sugar units. And with single sugar units, we have glucose, which is the primary energy source for your brain and muscles. And then you have fructose. This is a fruit sugar. It's metabolized in your liver. Then you have galactose, and this is basically a component of milk sugar. So those are the monosaccharides. The disaccharides are basically 2 sugar units. So now we have things like sucrose, which is table sugar, and that's made up of glucose and fructose. Then we have lactose, which is basically milk sugar, which is glucose and galactose. And then we have maltose, which is found in a lot of grains and whatnot. And this is just 2 glucose molecules, okay? Those are the simple sugars, so the simple carbohydrates. Now we have complex carbohydrates. And I forgot to say, I guess most people know this, but carbohydrates and sugars are kind of somewhat used interchangeably, especially in the world of nutrition and whatnot. They're not exactly the same thing, obviously, but sugar, carbohydrates, they're cut from the same cloth. Okay. So, and sugars are carbohydrates. So a lot of people understand that, but we'll talk a little bit more about the details of that later. So complex carbohydrates consist of oligosaccharides or oligosaccharides. And these are shorter chains, and they usually have like 3 to 10 different sugar units. And those include some like prebiotics, like fructo-oligosaccharides, or if you've ever seen FOS on the back. And I think there's galacto-oligosaccharides. And if you ever see that on the back, obviously that's hard to read or pronounce, but those are different prebiotic fibers or different components of prebiotics for your gut bacteria. We'll get into gut health and stuff later as well. So those are oligosaccharides, and then there's polysaccharides, and these are things like starch. So starch has amylose and amylopectin within it, and that makes up starch. Fiber, you have like soluble and insoluble fibers. These are polysaccharides. And then even glycogen, which is the storage form of a lot of the carbohydrate and sugar in your muscle tissue, and specifically animals of any kind. Glycogen is stored usually in the muscle tissue. So those are polysaccharides. Just not super important to understand the details of that, but I just wanted to kind of lay that out there so you understand glucose, fructose, galactose, all those things, sucrose, all that. You have a kind of an understanding now as far as what makes up what. So what happens when you digest some carbs? Well, you start by putting them in your mouth. Your saliva starts to break down the starches in the carbs immediately. But the main digestion of carbohydrates starts in your small intestine. It breaks down big complex carbohydrates down into more simple sugar so they can be absorbed. It's kind of like disassembling Legos so they can be put away type of thing. So what does your body do with carbohydrates? Quick energy is probably the first thing it wants to do. It wants to use immediate quick energy, kind of like gas in the car. It's actually your brain's preferred fuel. Carbohydrate is your brain's preferred fuel. Powers your high intensity exercise or your more exertional type movements and exercise. It also spares your protein from being used. Storage, as far as storage of carbohydrates, typically stored in your glycogen, which is in your muscles mostly, but also in your liver. It's kind of like a fuel tank, but also it can relate to fat storage too. Excess carbohydrate in your body converts to fat specifically. It's kind of like an overflow tank, and your fat is where the excess carbohydrate will end up going. Your body isn't going to get rid of it. Remember, energy cannot be created or destroyed. It's only going to be transmuted or transferred or moved around. But one of the things with carbohydrates is something called the glycemic index. And I feel like we should discuss this just a little bit. The glycemic index is basically like your speed limit by which carbohydrates are being digested in your body. Think of it kind of like a speed limit. So high glycemic foods digest very fast and they create kind of a blood sugar spike. They really raise your blood sugar fast. Lower glycemic foods, they digest slower and they don't create as much of a spike. They still raise your blood sugar, but a more steadier raise. And then the range for the glycemic index is usually 0 to 100. Lower is slower, higher is faster, right? But why does that actually matter? So the glycemic index matters for a number of different reasons. When we're thinking about things like diabetes management, we don't really want to be spiking blood sugar. We don't want to be hitting the system with high sugar all the time, especially if we can't get that sugar into the cells because of issues with insulin resistance. We talked about that in the previous podcast. Also, if you get hangry, it could be a glycemic index, related thing. If you have these big spikes and crashes and then you need more, that sometimes can lead to, almost like mood swings because of hunger. So that's part of the glycemic index. So that's when the glycemic index actually matters. When it doesn't matter as much would be like when you're eating mixed meals, like most of the time, like you're eating a lot of different foods. So those things get all mixed up and that affects the glycemic index specifically. And if you're eating mostly whole foods, I don't find that the glycemic index is probably going to be that big of a deal for you, considering there's certain fruits that might be a lot higher glycemic than other fruits. But specifically, if you're getting a lot of whole foods, vitamins, minerals, and fibers, and those kind of things, that glycemic index probably doesn't make that big of a difference for you. So not that big of a deal. Changes in real life with the glycemic index, if you add protein, you lower it. If you add fat, you lower it. If you add fiber, you lower it. Any kind of food combination typically lowers it. But just some examples, like if you ate just plain white rice by itself, that's going to have a high glycemic index versus eating like white rice, chicken, and vegetables. That's going to have a much lower glycemic index of the overall meal. Another example would be like apple juice, super high glycemic index. Apple juice is basically just sugar. I mean, anybody that thinks apple juice is healthy is kind of insane to me, versus eating like a whole apple. A whole apple typically has fiber and a ton of other phytonutrients and whatnot involved, which typically slows down that glycemic index response considerably. The reason why I explain glycemic index to you is because sometimes you'll hear nutrition gurus in the space really explaining that, oh, be careful with that kind of carb because of its super high glycemic index, or it's going to spike your blood sugar. And sure, that would definitely be something to be cautious of. And typically those high sugary, carby foods are going to be processed carbohydrate foods. You probably shouldn't be eating those anyways. But understand, if you eat those with other foods, you're going to slow that whole response. So the fear that is involved with eating that kind of a food, eaten with another food, is diminished drastically. So you don't have to really worry about it quite as much. Your protein intake, your fat intake, if you get essential fats in, micronutrients, vitamins, minerals are all going to play a role. Your fiber intake, your whole foods versus processed foods, it's all going to play a role. So it's really nothing to fret over. I just wanted to cover it real quick so people can understand. Bottom line, don't obsess over the glycemic index. It's really not that big of a deal if you're doing a handful of other things somewhat correct. It's just one thing to think about. And it's another reason why I hardly ever eat a meal without eating protein. If I'm going to have a meal, I want a certain source of protein. It doesn't have to be the entire priority of the meal, but I almost don't want to eat at all unless there's some sort of a protein source. I feel like if I'm just eating carbs and fats, why am I eating? Protein is typically what I need to be getting in consistently. And I understand all the benefits of protein, And I will every now and then snack on like some chips or something. But typically, if I do something like that, I'm gonna have like a protein shake after. I'm gonna mess with the glycemic index there to manipulate it in my favor. And if I'm not gonna have any decent nutrients, I'm gonna try to somehow supplement the better nutrients another way. Okay. Or sometimes I'll just have a handful of like almonds or something, or cashews, and that's gonna have some fats. Sometimes I'll do that to take some of my fat soluble vitamins just to have some. But sure, there's not much protein, but there's a little bit of protein in some of those nuts too. But typically, I'm trying not to eat a meal unless there's protein involved. It's just a good way to, I think, wrap your head around the whole situation. Okay, moving on. Beyond your traditional carbohydrates, let's talk about fiber a little bit. Fiber is super important. It has a ton of different benefits. Some, like the carnivore camp, will say that fiber is not an essential nutrient, which I think technically they're right, but it's kind of like one of those nutrients that if you're getting it in, you're probably benefiting a number of different ways. And let's talk about them here. It can help control your hunger and satiety. It helps improve insulin sensitivity. It supports your gut microbiome. It helps manage cholesterol. Helps reduce inflammation. Helps improve metabolic health overall. Okay. Some of the numbers you need to be thinking about with fiber, daily minimum target would be like 25 to 35 grams. Typical intake is about 15 grams. So most people aren't getting enough fiber. Your optimal range is anywhere between 30 and 50 grams. Your maximum useful range for most people is about 70 grams. So anything beyond 70 grams of protein, you're probably almost like binding yourself up. You're probably not doing yourself any favors with 70 grams or more. Certain types of fiber, there's soluble fibers, which are kind of like a gel forming fiber. These slow digestion, which helps with that glycemic index like we were talking about, helps control blood sugar, helps feed the good gut bacteria. And these are typically found in like oats and beans and fruits. Okay. Then you have your insoluble fiber. This is kind of the bulking kind of fiber. This helps kind of add, bulk to your stool, I guess, and actually get food through you, right? And this speeds the transit time, just like I just mentioned, prevents constipation, maintains gut health, and it's typically found in like vegetables and whole grains. But if you're adding more fiber, you want to be careful. You want to start slow and build up. You want to increase water when you increase your fiber intake. Spread it out throughout the day. You don't want to have all your fiber in one portion of the day. Not a good idea. Mix both types. Try to get insoluble and soluble fibers. And then just watch out for certain processed fiber supplements. Some processed fiber supplements are not put together really well. And I don't see, especially if you do like one shake a day or something, you do like 40 grams of fiber in one sitting. Like, again, that just goes into not spreading it out throughout the day. Not a great idea. Just avoid going too much too fast with certain fibers. And definitely if you're dehydrated and eating fiber, you're going to have a problem. You definitely need water when you're eating fiber. Overall, it's usually incorporated as a essential part in any healthy diet. It really enhances your diet quality. Specifically, can help support metabolic health, helps with diet adherence because it helps keep you full. So there's a lot of benefits to fiber. Okay. Don't slack on your fiber. On to dietary fats. It's another essential macronutrient that we need to be getting in. Not as much as protein probably, but dietary fats have 9 calories per gram. Every time you eat a gram of fat, you're getting 9 calories per gram. There's a couple different kinds of fat. You've probably heard of saturated fats, unsaturated fats, monounsaturated fats, all these different fats. We'll talk about them a little bit here. So saturated fats, typically the structure, there's no double bonds. They're solid at room temperature. They're stable for cooking most of the time, okay? They have different chain lengths. So you'll probably hear medium chain triglyceride or short chain triglyceride, those kind of things. Those are just the chemical component, the chemical makeup. Short chain fatty acids are typically 2 to 5 carbons. Medium chains are usually 6 to 12 carbons. Long chains are usually 13 plus carbons. Key sources of specifically saturated fat are animal fats, tropical oils like coconut and palm, and dairy products. Okay, those are the primary sources of saturated fats. Unsaturated fats. These are typically longer in their fatty acid chain. But you've probably heard of monounsaturated fatty acids or MUFAs. They typically only have like one double bond within them. Sources of these are like olive oil, avocado, nuts, macadamia nuts, those kind of things, and macadamia oils and olive. Sources of these are like olive oil, avocados and avocado oil, nuts, most nuts, macadamia oil. primarily that's monounsaturated fats. There's a ton of different health benefits to some of those, and they're really good to be eating as a healthy fat source. Then there's polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs. So these are part of the unsaturated fats. You got mono and poly. PUFAs a lot of times get more of a bad rep. They have multiple double bonds as far as how they're chemically made up, but they include some essential fatty acids like your omega-3s and your omega-6s. Trans fats. Okay, trans fats are typically just bad. I'm not even going to really talk about them much. There are some natural sources of trans fats that potentially could have some health benefits, but typically the ones that we come into contact with are artificial. They're due to industrial processing, fried foods. They should just be avoided. Okay, and that's where a lot of the industrial seed oils and stuff lie. And well, not typically. Those are typically PUFAs. But then a lot of times if they oxidize and whatnot, they can turn to trans fats. This is all the deeper biochemical discussion that we don't necessarily need to have right now. But some of the functional roles of fats in our bodies, structurally, they help maintain cell membranes. They help maintain the integrity of your cells. They also help form what's called the myelin sheath around your neurology, around your nerves. This myelin sheath helps conduct impulses through those nerves. Super important. From a metabolic standpoint, they are an energy storage vessel. They are involved with hormone production, 100%. Your hormones are made up of a lot of different fat components. They also are involved with gene expression and the inflammation regulation response. They're also involved in transport. So fats are super important for fat-soluble vitamin absorption. So your vitamins A, D, E, and K are super important for having fat along with them to get them into your system. They're fat soluble. So a lot of different things going on with fat as far as the functional roles and the importance. So a couple more things to talk about here with fat metabolism and processing. I want to talk about MCTs versus LCTs. So MCT, you've probably heard of medium chain triglycerides. These typically have a characteristic where they're a little bit more rapidly absorbed, which usually leads to a little bit more quick energy production. They also help with ketone production, which is a whole other discussion, but they also help people, produce ketones, and some people have really found a lot of benefit. And some people have really found a lot of benefit from being in a state of ketosis, which again, I'm not sure is very sustainable, but some people have seen really cool benefits from being in and out of ketosis, or I guess in ketosis. Some benefits there are enhanced energy, increased metabolism, cognitive support. A lot of people recognize clearer mind and less brain fog when supplementing with like either MCTs or eating a lot of MCT oil as they're in somewhat of a state of ketosis. It's a nuanced discussion, again, like I said, that we're not going to dive deep into tonight. But also people have seen exercise performance specifically with some MCT oil. I actually have put some MCT oil in some of my pre-workouts, not a ton, not like a full serving, but sometimes enough to just give me a little bit of a boost, especially if I go to the gym fasted, which I usually do. I like to have just a little bit of something that's going to push me through a nice long solid workout. But LCTs, long chain triglycerides, these are typically a little bit slower digested. Okay. These are involved with your lymphatic system transport. These are more likely stored. Okay. Your hormones depend on these quite a bit, but they're more likely to be stored. So MCTs are much less likely to be stored. LCTs are much more likely to be stored. I just thought that was kind of important. I want you to know. We'll talk a little bit about which is which in a minute. But so now let's dive into the essential fatty acids here. First one, the omega-3s. We've got ALA, which I mentioned earlier, alpha linolenic acid. That's the more plant-based version. But then you also have EPA and DHA, and those are marine fatty acids, typically like fish oils. But these have really important functions like brain development. They're anti-inflammatory. Cardiovascular health is involved here. Hormone production is involved with these as well. And those differ quite a bit from the omega-6s. Omega-6 fatty acids, they're in tremendous amount more abundance in a lot of our processed foods and our hyper palatable processed food landscape that we live in. The historical intake of these, it was only about 2 to 3% of calories way back when, probably like hunter-gatherer on through the Industrial Revolution and all into that. But the modern intake is often like 6 to 10 times that, if not way more. Okay. You'll see like tremendous ratios of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. It's crazy. And it's because they're in a ton of seed oils and the different industrial oils that we use in a lot of our different packaged and processed foods and factory farm meats and everything. Even when you feed some of these animals, then you're going to consume the animal. If you feed them a diet high in these omega-6 oils, well, those omega-6 oils end up in the animal. So then when you eat the meat of the animal, you end up consuming a higher ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. So this is another component of, trying to eat grass-fed versus grain-fed and those kind of things. So again, another discussion for later, but these are just some of the ideas as to why you hear about these things. You see these things in the marketing and whatnot when you're at the grocery store. But omega-6s specifically, they convert really quickly to arachidonic acid in the body, and they're stored in the fat tissue more easily. They have a very long half-life. They take forever to actually break down, and they can drive inflammation when they're excessive. Specifically, this arachidonic acid is converted from linoleic acid, which is the primary acid in the omega-6s. It's found in animal products, egg yolks, organ meats, those kind of things. It has a lot of different biological roles, some positive ones: cell membrane structure, brain development, muscle growth, exercise recovery, skin health, those kind of things. But the negative effects are probably what people focus on a little bit more with the omega-6s, because they tend to be pro-inflammatory, meaning when you have a high ratio of tons of omega-6s and not enough omega-3s, your body tips into this inflammatory mode, which is not great for a number of different things. That can increase pain signaling. It can actually increase your pain sensitivity. It can increase blood clotting, and it can really alter your immune response as well. So that's something that you want to be thinking about. So trying to minimize the super high omega-6 ratio to omega-3 ratio. It's a nuanced thing as well. Ancestrally, we were eating like a 1-to-1 ratio way back when, years ago, before modern civilization became what it was. The modern ratio is now like, instead of 1-to-1, like let's go omega-3 to omega-6. Now the modern ratio is more like 1 to 15, almost like minimum. So like omega-3, 1, omega-6, 15 at a minimum. I mean, I've seen people do certain tests. There's actually these really cool tests now. I think there's a company called like Zenzino that runs like a specific balance test that can actually test for your omega balance. And I've had a couple of patients do it, and they said that they were coming back like 52-to-1, or 1 to 52 if you're going omega-3 to omega-6, which is crazy, right? And actually, I specifically have a patient that I didn't recommend this, but they did this by themselves. They did this program with this company, and they found specifically that her and her husband has multiple sclerosis, MS. Her husband has tremendous pain all over his body. He's in a wheelchair. She and him both wanted to do this program just to improve some health functions, and they were hopeful that maybe, hey, it would help with his MS. They ended up doing like I want to say it was like a 6-month program, and they got their ratio. They retested after, and they got their ratio down from 1 in 52, 1 in 50-ish. I think they both were right around 1 to 50. And I think they got it down to single digits. They got it down like 1 to 8 or 1 to 5 or something like that, through supplements and eating a certain specific diet and that kind of thing. And the husband's MS symptoms are dramatically better. He's not cured, but dramatically better. The aches and pains that he's suffered with day in and day out are almost gone. Not sure he doesn't have certain neurological function because of his MS, but the pain and the quality of life the pain reduced and his quality of life ramped up dramatically. So there's definitely a huge influence with these acids and with this balance in our bodies. There's no denying that specifically. But another quick thing to think about is like when you're cooking with certain oils, there's something called a smoke point. A lot of people have heard of this. Typically, your saturated fats have a higher smoke point, so they don't oxidize when you heat them. Those ones are like avocado, coconut, other saturated fats, butter, tallow, specifically grass-fed butter, and then there's a medium smoke point, and that's olive oil. Olive oil has like a medium smoke point. I don't recommend cooking with olive oil because typically people cook way too hot and it's going to smoke it, which is going to oxidize it, which I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think when you oxidize a monounsaturated fat, you turn it to a trans-saturated fat, which is a trans fat, which is no good. Don't quote me on that. I need to actually look into that. So, and then the low smoke point oils are things like flax oil and other like seed and vegetable oils. So we shouldn't be cooking in these things. However, when you go to any restaurant, guess what everything's cooked in? those seed oils, right? So you're getting a lot of those oxidized fats immediately when you sit down at a restaurant and eat. But typically your higher quality fat sources are like cold pressed oils, grass-fed animals, wild-caught fish, raw nuts and seeds. And there's also some importance as to how you store those fats. You need to store those fats in a cool, dark place, proper containers, limit like air exposure, okay? Because they can oxidize. When you eat oxidized fats, I'm not sure exactly what form it turns them into, but I know it's not as healthy as it was before they were oxidized. Okay, last macronutrient. Wait, I thought there was just carbs, fats, protein. Nope, there's one more, and it's alcohol. Alcohol is a macronutrient, and alcohol has 7 calories per gram. Protein had 4, carbs had 4, fat had 9, alcohol has 7. All right, can't forget about this one. So alcohol is basically like an empty calorie nutrient. It's basically like a little bit of a calorie bomb, and it just comes in and messes everything up. Okay, it's prioritized by the body when it comes in because it's basically a poison. Alcohol is basically a poison. So it interferes with all the other biological processes that are going on in your body, and your body wants to prioritize detoxing the alcohol over everything else. The alcohol is basically metabolized primarily in your liver. That's pretty obvious. It converts to acetaldehyde and then to acetate. And this takes precedence over all other nutrients. So if your body's trying to burn fat, it's trying to produce proteins, it's trying to do the things that we've already talked about, alcohol comes in and just puts a halt to all of it. Not all of it completely, because our physiology is miraculously complex. It doesn't completely shut it down, but to a major degree, it does get prioritized over the other things that need to be happening. It has a huge metabolic effect. It basically suspends fat oxidation, so it suspends fat burning. It reduces your ability to metabolize glucose as well. And it typically forces the storage of some of these other nutrients as things are being processed to detox the alcohol. Not a good situation if you're trying to optimize body composition, right? So basic health of alcohol, things like liver function impairment, that's kind of an obvious one. But there's a huge amount of hormone disruption that's going on as well. Brain health, brain fog, those kind of things, cognition effects. And then metabolic compromise. So just a lot of the metabolic processes that need to be happening can't happen because the alcohol is being prioritized. All right. So alcohol, not a great idea. I don't think you need to completely stay away from it. You just got to be really cautious with your moderation and whatnot. And sure, I mean, don't get me wrong. I like to enjoy some drinks every now and then. I love to drink some beer every now and then. I like going out with friends and having a couple cocktails and that kind of thing. I don't think it's something you need to be super nuanced about. But you have to be careful because it can sneak up on you. You can easily start drinking more and more. And then you have to realize that if you have any other kind of health and fitness goals, well, they're kind of being subverted by your body's attempts to deal with the alcohol. Sometimes you just have to make choices in the moment and prioritize what makes more sense when. You know, sometimes you want to have fun. Sometimes you want to be a little bit more healthy. Sometimes you want to do a little bit of both and minimize the damage. You know, there's lots of ways to do that. And that's an important thing to learn. So those are basically the macronutrients. And I really wanted to dive further into like the micronutrients and go into the complexities of fat loss and whatnot, but this already got way too long. So I think we'll save that for the next one, and we'll really just focus on, you know, grasping some of that information, understanding macronutrients a little bit more. And then next week we'll pick up on the micronutrients, understanding the complexities and the nuances of micronutrients, and then we'll dive right into fat loss and how to maximize that process, leveraging, you know, your input output, the complexities of the input being the different nutrients, and then how to leverage the different components of output with your total daily energy expenditure and all of that. So before this gets too crazy long, I guess I'll just sign off. But thanks for listening. I appreciate you. I hope you learned a couple things. Sorry if it was kind of boring. Sorry if it was kind of review, but I'm sure some people will be able to replay this over and over and really pound it into their heads, and you'll learn a ton. So thanks for listening. I'll catch you next time.
All right, that's a wrap for today's episode of the Health is Hard podcast. I hope you found some valuable tips to help you on your journey to a healthier, more fit, more resilient version of you. Remember, building a stronger, healthier you takes time, and I'm here to support you every step of the way. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend who could benefit from the goods that were in this one. Be sure to check out the show notes for resources and a special offer from our sponsor, Element X Health and Fitness. As a listener, you can get my free 83-page Chiro Companion Mobility Guide when you visit elementxhfc.com. That's Element X, H as in health, F as in fitness, C as in culture. If you have questions, suggestions, or just want to connect, find me, Dr. Matt, on Instagram and TikTok at Dr. E Health, DRE Health, and Twitter at DREX Health. Let's keep this conversation going. Thank you for being part of the health and fitness culture we're building together. Keep putting in the work, stay consistent, and cheers to making health a little less hard today.